project, this certificate in practice management, is a happy product of funding being available and us wanting to do something. Because you all know that sometimes funding is available but for something you don't really want to do, or you really want to do something and funding isn't available. We had a hallelujah moment when Vicky Ling ascertained that the UK Commission for Employment and Skills wanted to work on improving management in this country. It had a daunting competition title, which was about supply chains, and we thought, well, that's not what we're about. But what we were about, I think between Vicky and Matt's consultancy experience and the work that I've done, we have almost 100 years experience of working with firms and not-for-profit organisations, and particularly Matt and Vicky do an awful lot of work with organisations going through issues such as change management and sometimes heading off crises that if they'd been consulted earlier, the crisis might not have hit the point that it did. So we put together a bid and ran a pilot project, and the pilot project worked very well last year. We had 24 people, which was our target size of group, and they were a mixture of people from private practice and not-for-profit organisations. I would say we are firmly wedded to that mix. We think both cohorts learnt a lot from each other. But let me now ask Matt to play the video, which is a very short one. So what we did is devise a course, some face-to-face, some online training, and it worked out about 60 hours of training. And the aim is something we're all passionate about, is trying to ensure that you can run your organisation as well as you can. And we see concerns. Who just went to the talk with Matthew Smurden and the James from the Cass Business School? Was anyone at that course on leadership? Yes, I mean, some of those issues about if you're a non-lawyer manager in a legal environment, that can be difficult. It can be difficult if you're a lawyer who's a manager in a legal environment as well. Management is never easy. So we went to, starting off with Matt Howgate and Vicky Ling was a great starting point. We've brought in other trainers who we think are excellent. Some of them deliver face-to-face sessions. Matthew Moore, for example, has done an online module, which we'll tell you in a second how you can access that. So what was the content? Well, it was designed around the Specialist Quality Mark and Lexcel. Can I just see who uses the SQM in their organisation? Who does Lexcel? So, anyone else doing the SQM? Sorry, you didn't put their hand up. Okay, so quite a mix we find. Lots of solicitors' practices seem to use Lexcel. Would you say that's fair?
Increasingly.
Or still increasingly?
Yeah,
okay. And lots of, there are some people for whom the SQM is easier and therefore they stick to that. So we've gone through and we've devised the whole course around these, so that the subjects are familiar to people and will be a sort of natural fit with the topics as you think of them. And having had a practice last year, we've certainly refined the course for this year. So we had a pilot course last year, and we're now running the course this year as a commercial proposition, but with we hope, a very competitive price, because we know the sector cannot bear heavy costs in anything that it does. So we've got, moving on, so I'm just going to flip through because you've got these slides, but we've got new content for the not-for-profit sector. So bear in mind what I said about we're going to keep private practice and NFP sectors together, and we are going to have often a wide geographical mix. We're sensitive to issues of confidentiality, and you might not want to be on the same session. You know, if you're an organisation in Stoke, you may not want someone else from Stoke being on your course, and we're sensitive to that when we take bookings for the course, because you may not want to discuss openly issues with people you regard as rivals. But what we have had a tremendous response from the Future Advice Fund talking to us about how they would like to take a lot of the issues that have been trialled in the not-for-profit sector, and they want to embed that, and that's certainly what we will do. So the next set of courses that we run will have the same format as before and be open to the not-for-profit sector and the private practice, but there will be more content for NFPs, and that will be, we haven't quite decided how that will be, but it will be an extra session on top of the course with no further payment because of the support from Future Advice Fund. So looking at the slide, you can see it'll be about innovation, generating income, partnerships, strategic planning, all those things that you would expect that would add, I think, an awful lot to those from the sector who are attending. What is it? 60 hours of training. Okay, let me make a confession. When we bid for the money, when we got it, had I thought that 60 hours of training is an awful lot of training to prepare in, how long did we have, 3 months, 4 months? It's a lot of training. And I think that one of the successes was, I mean, bluntly, that we have all been doing this for so long. And also, we had a fantastic group of cohorts. The first 24 people doing the course were fantastic. They were not afraid to give us feedback. So, and we managed to have a structure that meant that we had a session, and then people had time to do online modules. Then you came back, did some more face-to-face work, more of a gap, and then another face-to-face. People were very complimentary about the amount of food I ordered. Personally, I thought once you've had croissant and coffee in the morning, a mid-morning coffee with a biscuit, lunch, afternoon tea with cake, you know, I thought really I'd probably overdone the food. But when I suggested that the next session was going to have less food, everyone said, no, Carol, we are enjoying this. So, we have a website. There is a module on there which you can access for free, and we'll give you the link in the next slide. And we've put as much information as we can. So let me stop talking about the course, and let's go over to have a discussion really about some of the content of the course. But this is if you want to do a free time management module, it's on the website. And was this the one that one of our participants she delegated this homework to one of her colleagues to ascertain whether she was good at managing her time? We thought therefore she'd pass that module with flying colours. Right, thank you.
I think one of the things to say about the course is it is very practical in the way that we deal with things. It contains theory, but it's designed to be a really practical introduction to management skills that you can take back immediately and use in the environment of the organisation you're running. You may not be the manager of the whole organisation, you may be a team leader or a supervisor within a team. There's lots of stuff in there that's relevant to whatever role you have within the organisation, but it's practical skills. And so what both Vicky and I are going to do now is just run through a couple of potted sessions to give you some idea of the types of things we cover, and to an extent the way we cover them, although quite bluntly you can't cover anything in any particular detail in 10 minutes, but it just gives you a bit of a taster. One of the things we make quite a lot of in the course is strategic planning and the importance of strategic planning. It seems to me that there is an absolutely clear link between effectively run organisations and organisations that have got a plan for the way they're going to do things. I spend a fairly large part of my life going into organisations that are in crisis, and almost invariably they're organisations that don't have a clear strategy, they don't have a clear action plan, they don't have any operational plans. And that's probably because they haven't had the time or space to think about putting them together, and actually largely because the people heading them up are what is typically described as an accidental leader. They didn't become a manager by design. They became a manager by just being there long enough and saying, I will do that when some other person left. And so they haven't had any management training, they haven't had any skills training. They don't know really what to do in terms of setting good strategy. They've never done it before and nobody's told them how. So what we're trying to do in this session is to give people really good toolkits that they can take away with them. One of the ways that we try to do that in the sessions is by encouraging the participants to share their own good and bad practice, what they've seen work and what they've seen not work. And of course, what Vicky and I and Carol and the other tutors do is we try to put our hands in as well and say, well, look, actually, if you think about this, this might be a really good way to do it. And we then provide active support to the participants on the course who then go back to their organisations. So we'll provide tutorial support to help them implement strategies or performance management systems or dashboards so they better understand how to review the data they've got, or better management information, or whatever it might be. We try to help them come up with real practical answers to the problems that they've got. Strategic planning is somewhere that a lot of organisations fall down. And there's two things in there, and the most important word is the plan bit of planning. I see lots of strategic plans, business plans, which don't contain any level of plan whatsoever, yet they are put forward as the plan for the organisation, and there's nothing in there that looks remotely like a plan. This is the definition of plan from Lexl 6. Lexl 6, Lexl generally is far better on strategic planning than the specialist quality mark is. I know a number of advice agencies are moving towards Lexl, a number of law centres have already done that. Those that have it will be moving to Lexl 6 over the next period, and so it's probably useful for us to use that as a starting point. Lexl also requires your business plan to cover all of that detail. It's not uncommon for me to look at a business plan or a strategic plan. It's 20 odd pages, 20 pages of which describe the organisation, describe what it does, describe where it operates, describe the staff who work there, give some indication of its vision, and then there's one page or 2 pages which have a long list of things which are defined as objectives. That's it, it's just one long list of objectives. I looked at a plan the other day, there were 5 purported objectives, everyone had a number of bullet points underneath. If you looked at the bullet points, there were something like 34 different objectives. What was lacking from any of this was any description as to how any of that was going to be achieved. Who was going to do it, when it was going to be done by, what it was going to cost, what the win was going to be, and how they'd know whether it worked. None of that was dealt with in any place, in any of the strategic planning documentation. That's where strategic plans fall flat, and that's the type of thing that we try to pick up in the course. One thing for strategic planning, if you are involved in the strategic planning in your organisation, try to separate your business as usual, keeping things turning over on a day-to-day basis, from fascinating, interesting strategies to grow new projects or to expand what you do. Try to separate them out, because actually the drivers for each might well be different. One is about your survival, the other one is about perhaps your survival, but perhaps something that you might not need to focus on, and clearly survival is often more important than some of the other elements. You have to tell me when I run out of time. Is it a plan or is it a wish list? The vast majority of strategic planning I see from both private practice and non-profit agencies is merely a wish list that has arisen out of a strategic planning day or a staff away day, and it's a list that encapsulates everything that everybody wanted to see, and nobody wanted to tell anybody that they can't really do that this year. So it's just a long list of things that everybody wishes would happen in the organisation and doesn't really happen. That's not a good strategic plan. The problem is turning that wish list into an actual strategic plan. That requires time, it requires pain, and it requires knowledge and skill. And that's the thing that typically lacks, and that's one of the things that we will address on the training programme. How do you take that broad list of objectives and turn it into something more meaningful? So let's give you a good example of one that I see very often, which is increased pro bono activity in the law centre. That's not an unusual one to see in an NFP environment. Well, what does that actually mean? What's the extent of that particular wish? What do you want to achieve by it? How are you going to do it? Who's going to do it? What action is necessary for you to do that? What resources are there? If you're going to take a staff member away from casework, therefore decreasing the amount of billable hours that they generate, how much additional benefit does that have to generate in order to make it worthwhile? And can you afford taking them away from caseload? Can you physically afford to do that, or is it going to decrease the revenue that you need and you won't then be able to meet your overhead at the end of the year? And at the end of the year, how will you judge whether that's been a success? And from a management perspective, there's a governance issue here, which is that as a manager of an organisation, I'm expected to deliver certain things, and my board ought to be able to know whether what I've delivered was worth the time I spent on it. And that's really important in the strategic planning process. So one of the things we talk about is how you might want to do it. Well, clearly, first of all, you have to identify that there's a problem or something you need to address. We always say that it's useful to have some kind of guiding policy or vision statement or general ethos that sits behind it, because on a day-to-day basis you'll be making decisions about implementation, and you have to make those decisions within the context and the framework that you're operating. And that might mean saying, well, actually, yeah, I know if I want to do this I might have to go there, but that's not within our general sense of direction, that's not within our vision, that's outside the framework within which we operate. So having some clear parameters on what we can and can't do is really good, but actually the most important thing is a good plan. It's a really important bit, and that's where most people miss it. If you are setting a plan, you have to ask yourself, when you step back and look at it, does it actually tell you how to get where you want to go? And if it doesn't, it's probably not a plan. And I think we can all do that. You can all go back to whatever organisations you come from now, have a look at your strategic plans. Now, okay, sometimes your strategic plans are underpinned by quite detailed operational planning, and you might have to look in there for the detail, but somewhere there should be something that says, that's where we want to go, that's how we're going to get there. What we do on the course is really work with people so they understand exactly how to put the detail onto those broad strategic aims, because that's the skill set of a manager. To know how to make something happen, how to turn it from vision to reality. And that's exactly the kind of practical skills that we want to focus on the course. Interesting graphic there. Description of your desired future state. Where do you want to be? Where are you now? What's the gap between the two places? How are you going to cross that gap? And how you know you got there. Pretty straightforward, but lacks from almost every strategic plan I ever look at. It's fairly glib, but the capital letters are quite important there. Pretty much everywhere I go to has a business plan. Very few of them actually have a business plan. And that's the kind of practical thing that we try to resolve through this course. At which point I'm going to pass over to Vicky.
Okay. Could I have the notes? Oh, thank you. Okay, so one of the things that we look at in the course is managing your legal aid contracts, and also linking it up with what Matt was just talking about in business planning. We look at practical problems, as Matt has said, that people are experiencing now, things that are in front of them, what do they need to know, where are you going? And in relation to legal aid, it can be useful to just get an idea of what is the scale of legal aid now. So one of the things that I've mentioned to numerous people, which comes as a bit of a shock to quite a lot of them, is, I mean, not that spend is falling, unfortunately, we all know that. I think people are not often aware of how much money is still being spent on legal aid. So it's not in the right places, we would say, probably, and it's not as much as it should be. But there's still a considerable amount of money. If we look at civil legal aid expenditure in the last financial year, that they've given us figures for £742 million. So, you know, it's money worth having. For not-for-profit agencies, though, the position is extremely stark, that in the pre-LASPO year we had 870 organisations which were NFP organisations with contracts. By the end of 13-14 it was down to 95. So the vast majority of NFP organisations, for various good reasons, weren't able to go on with legal aid contracting. And if you're going to be one of the ones that is going to continue to make a success of it at the 95, you need to have a very clear idea of what you're doing and how you're going to get there. The biggest category in civil is now family, where we've got £594 million being spent in the last financial year. And of that, we can see that public law is the largest amount of spend. And legal help, and I think this is very related to the point that I earlier made of the not-for-profit agencies dropping out of legal aid, was not-for-profit agencies were heavily reliant on legal help, on advice and assistance. They weren't making much use of legal representation. So when the priorities under LASPO changed, representation became the main area of spend. Legal help is now running at a third nationally of pre-LASPO levels. They weren't in a position to adjust. So now we know that this is the reality which is out there. The NFP agencies need to know, probably what we're looking at is going to be legal help running at about a third of our legal aid income compared to our representation. And that's the kind of useful information which an individual agency can then start to work with and say, what are our figures telling us? Are we around about a third of our legal help? Should we, if we're not there, we're probably doing too much work which is not really adequately funded. We need to be looking at how we can increase our legal representation work. Strangely, within legal help, family public law has increased as other forms of family have fallen out of legal aid or become very, very difficult to access. So other areas, we know that immigration is still an important area of spend, 41 million, and housing is the next. Mental health, immigration, and then housing. And of course, housing is where a lot of NFP agencies now have their remaining contracts. So that's going to be an area which people should be concentrating on. And thinking about planning, again, what's coming up? What do we know about? What should people be thinking about? Well, if you want to be continuing your legal aid contracts, and on the course we have very valuable input from senior managers at the legal aid agency so that participants can see legal aid from the legal aid agency's point of view. And we had great feedback from people saying, you know, it was very interesting to see how the legal aid agency sees it. It's completely different. They are looking at it from the other end of the telescope. And of course that gave them a fantastic insight which helps them to manage their own contracts better. So what we know is that the legal aid agency now is going to be either extending contracts or terminating them early to try and start new civil contracts mainly altogether in April in 2018. So what does that tell us about timetables? That tells us that we're probably looking at a tendering opportunity next summer. So what should we be doing to gear up for that? We know that we've got issues around supervisors. What's the best predictor of the future is usually looking back to the past. So if we look back to previous contracts, we know that the legal aid agency is unlikely to be doing a very complex tendering operation. They've tried that recently with crime. It's spectacularly crashed and burned. They're unlikely to do something similar to that, so that's a bit of a relief. But we know that they're interested in supervisors. They've been interested in supervisor ratios for a long time, and so thinking ahead, if we want to make sure that our contract bids are safe. We need to be looking at our supervisor to staff ratios. We know that panel membership, where it's possible to be a member of a panel, that has been a key feature in contract bids in the past. So if you're looking at making your plan a real thing, it should be translating through into your training and development plan to see if there are panel memberships that are appropriate for the categories of law that you're doing. Are people working towards those panel memberships? And the other thing that we know that the legal aid agency has historically been interested is in the location of offices. So thinking ahead, looking at needs locally. Are you in a procurement area and you're quite happy in that procurement area? Are there other procurement areas nearby where you think it would be helpful to link into other projects which you're doing? You want to move into those areas. Think about what offices are required by the legal aid agency, and start your planning now. I don't know if anybody here was in the very good workshop we had earlier with Julie Bishop about European bidding, but one of the messages that came through very strongly from her discussion was you need to plan early, don't leave it to the last minute. And I think that's the same thing with any form of contracting, legal aid, etc. So what do we know about the market, the legal aid market? Well, for those of you, you saw in the video, one of the participants was saying that one of the exercises that we do is a theoretical, how would I set up a legal practice from scratch? What do I actually need to do? Taking people through the step by step. And it looks maybe taking a sort of more positive spin on the appalling cuts to legal aid. Maybe we've got to something like the minimum spend here. Maybe they can't cut it much more than this. Maybe this is where we are now for a while at least. So are there opportunities in the market? Well, I would say yes, there probably are. We know that many legal aid practitioners are of an older age profile. They are nearing retirement age, they are wanting to retire, and so that will leave gaps in the market, particularly in those key areas, family, mental health, immigration, housing. So there is going to be, or there is the opportunity for there will be the opportunity for new practices to move into those gaps. And as we've heard so many times today, we know that there will always remain a need for face-to-face provision and legal representation by a qualified lawyer. So despite all the other things that we know that are going on in terms of IT, we know that the market is there, and there will be opportunities. So other sort of points that we discuss, and again, this is another point which we discuss with the senior managers from the legal aid agency, is what happens if you're wanting to set up a practice now or open a new office now? Do you have to wait to 2018, or are there arrangements that you can make within the existing contract provision? One of the things that people are doing, because the legal aid agency isn't letting any new contracts, is people are merging. They are taking over other organisations because they want that legal aid contract. And recently I was approached by a big firm that didn't have a London presence, saying, could you find us a firm with a housing and family contract, because we're really interested in moving into London. We can see that there's a need for increased legal aid provision in those areas. And we look at the provisions of for novating contracts under the current arrangements. However, if you don't want to take on a contract from somebody else, and of course one of the things that you'll look at when you look at the legal aid contract is that that's very onerous. You take over all the obligations of the previous contract holder to the legal aid agency. You'd have to be really, really confident that there weren't any skeletons in their cupboards. So Is there another way around it? Well, again, once you know your legal aid contract very well, you know that, okay, there's not going to be any way for you to open a new office and get new legal help matter starts. But as we've seen, legal help matter starts, although they're still important and they're a useful source of funding, they're not the be-all and end-all, and it may be possible for you to open an office if you've already got a contract and see people there for certificated work only, not provide funded legal help, unfortunately, so you'd have to take that on the chin. But if you felt that there was an opportunity in a particular area for expansion, you could do it that way, and then you could channel your work back to your existing office under certificates. So there are various possibilities and things which we can look at. And these are the kinds of things. What we do on the course is we have a bit of chat like we're doing now. And then if we were doing the course now, what we'd do is divide you up into little groups. You'd have a look at a problem, an issue, maybe thinking ahead, planning for new contract bid, and people would sit through and work it through in their small group and then come back and feed back to the group. And that way you get the benefit of the knowledge and the work and the experience of everybody who's on the course. It's very much a collegiate atmosphere, and people work really positively together, which has been absolutely great. So I don't think we've got anybody here who's interested in crime. Anybody doing? Everyone's civil, I think, so we won't bother about that. But crime is going to have to be retendered, isn't it? If you're a crime practitioner, it's no good just sitting there thinking, oh, phew, that's the end of that. They're not going to be able to roll on that 2010 contract forever, and people need to start thinking about what the opportunities are there. So some of the strategic planning issues which we've already touched on, one of the issues which people have been asking themselves for some time, and as you can see, lots of NFP agencies thought, well, no, the answer is no, we didn't want to continue, or we couldn't. And again, as Matt says in his consultancy, so do I sometimes get called into agencies that are struggling at the moment. Their legal aid contract isn't covering its costs, and we need to think about how can we do that. Some of the things that we look at in the course are things like performance management. How do you positively work with people who are currently perhaps not performing, not meeting targets? How do you really make a difference so that that contract turns around from being one that doesn't cover its costs to one that hopefully does? So those are the kind of things that we do. Or on a strategic level, we might think, you might be working through the issues about what would we want our next legal aid contract to look like, where would we be bidding, what categories of law, etc. And coming back to Matt's point earlier about the detailed business plan, which you will need to make that actually fly. And just to mention, perhaps I should hand over to Carol at this point to do the
sales
practicalities.
Pitch.
Yes.
We are running the course again. We have refined it. The first taught session is we start off with, we put some information and some modules online in April. 11th of April. We then have our first evening where we get together. We'll probably aim for about 24 people again. So 6 o'clock usually is the kick-off time. Go for an hour and a half, have dinner together, stay in a hotel, and then have a full day the next day. We break up the day. I mean, this is quite a long morning, so you may be feeling that already. But we try and break up the day so that we have sessions which are sort of 30 minutes or 40 minutes at most before you're then in a small group doing something. And that's how you get to meet other people at a similar stage, and that makes a big difference, I think, to people. Then there's more online work and follow-up work from the face-to-face, and then we repeat that. So there are 3 face-to-face sessions, and we're going to be running it in Birmingham. I'm really open for the next time we run it this year. If you want to say there is a part of Britain with good hotel or conference facilities that you know of, and it's easy for everyone in the country to get to, let me know. We ran the pilot course in Leeds, and so we're trying to move it, because people in Bristol and beyond were really cross that we chose to hold it in Leeds. But you know, it is quite difficult to find a place, but we will our plan is to keep running this course. We are all passionate about management. Lord Bark talked in his address about how he sounds like a sort of cross teenager a lot of the time, and now he's running his Access to Justice Commission, and he's trying to be sort of much more grown up about it. Well, I am very cross about legal aid cuts. I'm really, really very, very angry a lot of the time. But also, on top of that, I also get very cross when I think how difficult it is for many people to manage their organisations. And it's difficult to manage for many reasons, the accidental manager. And there was a really very interesting session. The first time we all met last year, there was that moment, wasn't there, when we said to people, we gave people a chance to explain what they were doing there. And one of the biggest problems everyone said was that they don't feel valued as a manager. They're either a lawyer trying to do management as well as casework, and they feel that everyone sort of is cross when they're not bringing in money, or they're non-lawyers trying to manage caseworkers and lawyers, and they feel that everyone begrudges them, So we're quite passionate, the three of us and the other tutors, about supporting people. And I'm also very aware that some organisations that have gone under, people whisper to me and say, if I'd been managing that organisation, that wouldn't have gone under. Now, there are lots of things that we can share, but actually the people on the course share with each other. And that's been, I think, a really important part. And we know that there are then networks. We try to set up web chat, chats online. And nobody really wanted that because they're too busy. But what they do like is they meet people on the course and then they're emailing each other to sort of say to each other, God, I've got this sort of problem, or let's discuss this. And they pick up things from each other. How to deal with a member of staff who's always grumpy. Not disciplinary level grumpy, but always grumpy. When that came out as a scenario someone else suggested, this ripple around the room, everyone knew that scenario. I'm sure nobody in this room does. Okay, so we're starting the course. It is 1950 plus VAT. It was half that price on the pilot because we were supported by UKCS. It is much cheaper than it would otherwise be because the pilot course has filtered into this, and we are happy to do flexible payments. But and there's a lot involved. We do give so all that covers all the accommodation, all the food. Wonderful training, and lots of stuff to take away that you can use in your working life. So we'd very much like to take questions from you. We know that lunch is ready, but if anyone's got questions, do ask them, or we'll stay, and those who want to go for lunch and anyone wants to come and talk to us, please come and talk to us. Any questions? Who spotted a typo in the brochure?
Thank you so much.
Proofreading job is yours in future. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. Any questions? Should we just break for lunch and then we'll stay here for a bit, and anyone who wants to talk to us, come and talk to us. Thank you so much for coming, and we hope that you'll spread the word, even if you are now all convinced that you don't necessarily need to come on the course, but that you know other people who do. So please do come and talk to us at any stage today. Thank you.